Hello, my name's Michael, and this is All Departments.
Here come the cherries, and we're heading for the top of the tree. Bournemouth is a team that's going to show Division 3. Here come the leaders and the scorers at the Saturday, showing how to win the Southern way. So we sing, come on Bournemouth, come on Bournemouth. While you're out there winning, hear the shouting and the singing. We sing, come on Bournemouth, come on Bournemouth. Here come the cherries, here come the cherries, here come the cherries, number one.
Hello and welcome to All Departments. The international break is upon us, but for once I'll have no trouble occupying my time, as in recent weeks there's been a small avalanche of books about our beloved cherries hitting the shelves. As an enthusiastic reader of publications about AFC Bournemouth over the years, this is a matter of high excitement for me, and not wanting the moment to pass me by, I wasted no time in inviting Alex Crook, co-author of Match of My Life, onto the podcast to discuss his new book and how it was written. Alex, welcome to All Departments.
No worries, absolute pleasure.
So, as far as I know, until recently, it's been 10 years since the last book about the cherries came out. Recently, there's been a minor avalanche. I think 3 have come out recently. Your own, one that the Echo did, a pictorial history, and another one called The Miscellany of AFC Bournemouth. Just tell us a bit about yours for those who haven't seen it.
Yeah, mine is called AFC Bournemouth, Match of My Life. It's co-written by myself and Pat Symes, a long-term journalistic colleague. And basically, we've spoken to 23 players, past and present, and got them to pick out their favourite game for the Cherries. Each chapter is based around that match and hopefully some untold stories behind it, and just getting them to open up with their emotions and really trying to give fans a perspective that perhaps they haven't seen before.
How did you have the idea for this book?
Well, it's actually a series from our publisher, Pitch Publishing, and I did the same book with Southampton, boo, last year. And when it became clear around about Christmas that the Cherries were looking a pretty good bet for promotion to the Premier League, I thought now would be the ideal time to do the same thing, really, and chronicle their incredible journey right back from the 57-58 season when they played Manchester United in the FA Cup quarter-finals. We've got Brian Bedford talking about that cup run, to their promotion under Harry Redknapp, which John Williams recalls fondly, to almost going out of business in the 1990s. We've got Matt Holland talking about that. They've dropped down to the Football League when Eddie Howe did such an amazing job to keep them up, and Steve Fletcher scored that never-to-be-forgotten goal against Grimsby, right through to the amazing climb to the Premier League last season.
Yeah, there's a lot of good memories, and like you said, it goes back quite a long way. In terms of putting the book together, can you just talk us through the process? Because I don't imagine it was just a question of phoning up some of the players and ex-players and asking them to put their thoughts down in words. There's probably a bit more to it than that, wasn't there?
Not really. I'd like to say it was some kind of scientific formula, but I suppose the trickiest thing is actually coming up with a list of players, and the publishers asked us to provide a list of 20 players. In the end, we did 23. Callum Wilson was a late introduction after his hat-trick against West Ham, which was fantastic to be able to bring it right up to date and remember that game. And then it was really a case of tracking down the players. Some were easier than others. I think we went through the phone book to find Ronnie Bedford and literally rung all the R Bedfords and got hold of him. We relied on our contacts to put us in touch with people like Ted McDougall. Obviously, we know Willow and Steve Fletcher and many of the more recent players. And I have to say a big thank you really to Max Fitzgerald and Kelly Somers at the club as well, because they were very accommodating and literally threw open their contacts book and allowed me to go down there towards the end of the season and interview the players one by one. So there's a lot of legwork in terms of setting up the interviews. Each interview took about 45 minutes, and then it's our job as authors to put their words into first persons and to really try and bring alive those emotions. So we're pretty satisfied with the end product.
Did you? I imagine you did. You had to get each player's approval for the final copy.
Yes, some asked for copy approval, not all. I have to say probably we did that more with the modern players, who perhaps are a bit more media conscious now of what they say and how they're portrayed. A lot of the older players were happy for us to do it at our discretion. Nothing in there, everything in the book has come from them. It's all their words. So, yeah, people wanted to tweak certain things. Tommy Elphick, for example, wanted to add a sentence about the club doctor at Brighton who helped save his career. So we got approval from the more recent players.
Were any of the players in the book difficult to sell it to? Were they difficult to convince?
Darren Anderson took a little bit of cajoling, to be fair. Just in terms of actually pinning him down for a time slot. But once he agreed to a time, and I got him on the phone for about 45 minutes, he was absolutely fine. I was really pleased with his chapter. He was very open and honest, particularly about his relationship with Jimmy Quinn and the circumstances around his decision to retire from the game completely, as he was sat as a substitute when 91st played 92nd in a game at Kenilworth Road against Luton. So that's worth a read. We did actually approach Harry Redknapp to do the foreword. He agreed, and we made numerous phone calls, but he kept fobbing us off, to be brutally honest. So that's probably the one glaring omission, although we've got people talking about Harry. But actually, in the end, I think Jeff Mostyn was probably maybe a more popular choice among the supporters to do the foreword, and he gave us a really good turn.
And were there any other players? I mean, Harry was an ex-player and obviously an ex-manager that you coveted, as it were, for the book, but you weren't able to contact, or they weren't too keen?
No, he was the only one. And I'm not sure if it was that he wasn't too keen. Every time we actually spoke to him, he said, yeah, no problem. But again, it was just pinning him down to actually sit and put his feelings into words. So no, everybody else we approached was absolutely fine. More than happy. And I think Tommy's actually ordered a dozen copies, so he's pretty pleased with the end product.
Clearly. I've read a few of the chapters and had a good flick through the book. I like the attention to detail in the book. I like the stats at the back. I'm always keen to see those. I suppose quite a lot of football fans are. And I like the way you give a little summary of each player's career before their chapter. And also the chapter that each player writes isn't just about that game, is it? It's about other details of their career. And you mentioned earlier about how you perhaps look a little bit into their emotions at the time. And so that was obviously something that you did deliberately, wasn't it?
When the publishers actually approached us originally with the idea of the Match of My Life series, their concept was that we would write 3,500 words on each chapter, just based around the match in question. My view on that was that would be quite dull copy and quite dull for the reader if you just had a succession of incidents. For example, we had a corner in the 15th minute and then we won a throw. Everybody knows that. So my intention was always to dig a bit deeper. And although each chapter is centred around a match and it comes back to the match in ebbs and flows, we've tried for each player to get something out of them that perhaps people didn't know before and wouldn't know without reading the book. For example, there's a lovely story with Ronnie Bolton about how he was working down a coal mine when the then manager Cox turned up on his doorstep and insisted that he drive him 10 miles back to Bournemouth for a trial. He wasn't particularly keen at the time, but obviously he did come down. In those days, the roads were quite poor, hence the fact it took so long. And the rest, as they say, is history. And also, for me, the most emotional interview that I did was with Janke Morgan about the game against Bolton when the Cherries won promotion to the Premier League. And he really opened up to me about the fact that he couldn't bring himself to fully join in the celebrations in the dressing room because he was thinking about his brother who died from brain cancer when they were both schoolboys. And I don't think anybody really knew that. He's certainly not opened up about that before. So things like that, really. I'd like to think there's some sad tales, there's some tear-jerking tales, there's some funny tales, and there's some happy tales. So hopefully we've ticked all those boxes.
Yeah, it's quite rare that we get the chance to see behind the everyday headlines and the stuff that happens on the pitch and the kind of soundbite interviews after the games, particularly with a club like Bournemouth, because we haven't had, as I mentioned earlier, a great deal of kind of long form writing done on us, and there hasn't been anything like the amount of attention on the club that there is now until very, very recently. And so I guess in some ways, even though we can be closer to the players than at perhaps bigger clubs, in other ways it kind of emphasises how little we know about them when we read a book like yours and some of the bits that are in there. And it's really interesting to see those details. Do you think going forward that the Cherries will perhaps struggle if they continue to be successful to have that kind of connection with the fans, or do you think it will remain? I mean, you travel around the country, you go to plenty of other clubs, and you've done other bits for other clubs. I think most football clubs like to see themselves as something special, as an exception, and the fans always feel like that. But do you think that is the case with Bournemouth, or do you think it's just the perception of those who are on the inside and the supporters?
I'm probably slightly biased here because of the book and because of the help that the press department there have given me. But from speaking to my media colleagues, maybe people who don't cover Bournemouth week in, week out as I do, I think the common consensus is that they've been a breath of fresh air this season. In the modern era, the Premier League era, if you like, too many clubs try and control the media. And that means that fans, the paying punter, don't necessarily get to see the human side. People like Morgan opening up about the troubles he's had in his life, and Harry Arter actually as well is very open about the criticism that came his way when he was struggling for form when Eddie went to Burnley, and that's an interesting chapter as well. But I think people like Jeff Mostyn, Max in the media department, and Eddie himself are keen for Bournemouth to retain their community ethos and their community spirit. It was the community, after all, that saved the club from going bust back in the 1990s, and played a big part in that back in 2009. So I think they're aware of their roots, they're aware of where they've come from, and I don't think they will lose sight of that. I hope they don't anyway.
In terms of the prospects of the club this season, we're moving on a little bit from your book here, but like I said, you watch a lot of football, you work in the sports media. I've asked you about the club in terms of its connection with the community. More perhaps pertinent is, in a wider sense, the club's prospects of staying and competing in the Premier League. You've probably seen us once or twice this season, maybe more, and you've seen plenty of other games. Do you think we're going to be able to survive our first year in the Premiership, or do you think we're going to struggle?
I was very confident going into the season. I picked out two players who I thought would shine in the Premier League. Matt Ritchie, who hasn't disappointed, and Callum Wilson, who certainly didn't disappoint. I think Callum's injury is a major blow, not just in terms of the goals that he scores, but the presence that he is. Really, the team was built to play to his strengths, I think, this season. I think Eddie alluded to that in the press conference last week when he said they'd have to change their style slightly. With him being injured and Max Grail as well, they've lost a lot of pace, which I think was something Eddie was keen to add to the team. If you look at his summer recruitment with the likes of Josh King as well, that's his main commodity. So I'm not as confident as I was, but I have a lot of faith in Eddie Howe. I think he'll be an England manager one day. And I think there will be three worse teams than Bournemouth in the Premier League. Sunderland and Newcastle are the obvious ones. I think they're better than Aston Villa as well. I think they're unlucky on the opening day of the season. I think maybe the emotion of the occasion got to them. If they play Villa this weekend, they probably beat them quite comfortably. So in answer to your question, I think they will stay up, but perhaps not as comfortably as they would do if Callum was fit.
No, it's going to be tight. We've had a lot of bad luck with injuries, obviously, and one really big player and two potentially big players for us.
I think Grader would have been a big player as well. I think he was just starting to show the form. Eddie's covered him for the last 2 years. You have to trust him when it comes to his recruitment, and I think he would be, and still will be once he gets back, a very good Premier League player.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're all looking forward to seeing him show what he could do. We didn't really see enough of him in the few games that he played, but he had, the thing we're lacking now is pace. I've talked about this a bit on the podcast recently. We're not blessed with the pace that we had up front, or certainly the players that are going to get in the team. And we've got Murray, good player. I've been really impressed with him, what I've seen of him, but then he hasn't really got the speed. And then the others who are potentially able to offer the speed, King, Ranty, possibly Christian Atsu, who we haven't seen much of at all, aren't necessarily going to be in the team or even in the matchday squad. So it's certainly a bit of a worry. Anyway, getting back to your book, Alex, I know it's on sale in the club shop. I bought my copy there the day that you were there signing them with a few of our esteemed players from the past. I think Steve Fletcher and John Williams were there the day I popped in.
Indeed.
Are you going to be doing any more of those events, or is it just a case now of people popping into the club shop and getting hold of the book?
The club shop is the main port of call. I think it becomes available on Amazon next weekend as well, particularly to any expat fans listening to this. Also available in Waterstones in town, and WH Smith, I believe, as well. We are hoping to stage another signing session, probably in the build-up to Christmas. Ted McDougall has promised to come over and lend us his services, and I'm still hoping that Tommy Elphick can do something for us as well. Obviously, he had to pull out last week because of his own injury problems, so there will certainly be something happening between now and Christmas.
And just finally, I mentioned about the books that have come out recently, and I've got most of the ones that have come out over the years, which isn't many. Have you read any, or did you use any of those books in your writing of Match of My Life? Because I mean, there's a couple that I refer to regularly, so I don't know if there was any that you would recommend to anybody here who maybe doesn't follow the Cherries publishing history quite as closely as I do. The two books that we mentioned actually in the acknowledgements helped out with the stats and just making sure we got the vital information correct. Were a couple that you've already mentioned. I think the definitive AFC Bournemouth, which was co-written by Lee Edwards, a very esteemed football statistician and historian, and Cherries, the first 100 years, which was penned by one of my former Bournemouth Echo colleagues, Kevin Nash, who sadly is no longer with us. So I'd recommend both of those, certainly. Yeah, that definitive AFC Bournemouth is off my shelf on a regular basis when I'm preparing for the podcast. So yeah, I definitely recommend that. In fact, I'd love it if an updated version came out soon. As it's probably over 10 years now since that came out, and there's quite a lot. I did hear that there was one in the pipeline, so perhaps watch this space. Oh, good news. Brilliant. All right then, Alex. Well, thanks ever so much for sparing the time to come on and tell us all about the book. And I hope people listening to this will certainly take the opportunity to purchase a copy and have a flick through. I've read about the first 4 or 5 chapters, and as I said before, I've really enjoyed those, and I'm looking forward to having a good look at the others as well. So, I hope you get the chance to see the Cherries as much as you can this season, and your prediction about us narrowly avoiding relegation comes through, and maybe we'll speak to you again soon. Great stuff, no problem. Pleasure to talk to you.
Flying high up in the sky, we'll keep the red flag flying high. From Dean Court to Wembley, we'll keep the red flag flying high.
Thanks again to Alex for sparing the time to tell us about the book. And if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, it comes highly recommended. If you're interested in learning more about the few tomes that have appeared about our Cherries over the years, there is a short review of most of them on the Cherry Culture section of the podcast website at www.alldepartments.wordpress.com. Prior to our last match against Watford, I interviewed Luther Blissett, the one man who can bring Cherries and Hornets fans together, and I'll be releasing that interview early next week, and whether you remember Luther banging the goals at Dean Court or not, it's well worth a listen. As we all know, everyone associated with AFC Bournemouth has been celebrating the life of Mick Cunningham recently, following his untimely death on the 27th of September. Mick was a man of many talents, which included being the lead singer and inspiration behind the Cherries house band Reg Varney. We're going to end this episode by playing out with Reg Varney's Leg Ends, in which Mick sang in his own inimitable style about some of his favourite legends in red and black over the years. So up the Cherries in all departments, and goodbye!
So happy I bought him flowers.
Oh, thank you.